Alright, buongiorno, AP European History. So this video is going to cover the end of World War I, World War I remembrance, and fascism in Italy. Just a breakdown of how this is going to go. Usually there'll be a daily task, some capers or short notes, something to keep you on track. There'll be a lecture with some questions. I'm going to try Edpuzzle actually for that. And you'll need to make an account. I sent you an email about that earlier today. There'll be some discussions on haiku as well. And then the reading and the test corrections, which we've already sort of talked about in class on Monday. I am sorry, I'm going to kind of overload you today, and there's not going to be that many funny things, but I'll try to put out some other fun little bits as I can. This is a reminder of some stuff. The big sort of day task for you to do is Stalin's Rise, and to finish the questions on this one. The test corrections due Friday, and the reading is due on March 31st, 2020. So, when we last talked about content, we were at the end of World War I, which goes from 1914 to 1918. There are soldiers in France who are mutinying. The Germans are running out of supplies, although because the Germans don't give accurate information to regular people, nobody knows that. And so this will come as a shock to them later on. And so Erich Ludendorff, the German head of the general staff, tries to do a one last ditch huge move into France to knock the British and French out of the war before the Americans arrive. The Americans are there to protect democracy, quote unquote, but really it's probably because they had heavy amounts of investment in France and Britain's war effort, and they were afraid they were going to get paid. With the Americans, the Germans can't break through. The Germans are also affected by the massive flu pandemic of 1918, which is oftentimes what's being compared with coronavirus or COVID-19 today. And eventually they will surrender. The Kaiser or Emperor of Germany will resign or abdicate. And the war will end on 11/11/1918 with the armistice that ends the war. Between 1917 and 1922, 3 to 4 of our big empires will be gone, and the theory that Germany was stabbed in the back at home will emerge because of the lack of information in Germany. There is a socialist uprising or communist-esque uprising called the Spartacist Uprising in Germany, but that'll also fail, though it does show kind of the level of anger. Now, you guys had read about the 14 points of the Versailles Treaty. I'd love you to think about what those were, if you remember back to that assignment. Now, like I said, it ends with an armistice. There's a lot of uncertain future elements. Woodrow Wilson argues in his 14 points for peace without victors, no territorial changes, no party gets blamed, and the right of people like the Slavs, the Poles, and other nations to have their own country. In the Treaty of Versailles, which will be signed in 1920, there will be little of that. And you read about why, but the maps are the biggest thing. This is the map of Europe before 1914. This is the map of Europe after the Versailles Treaty. You can see chunks of countries are taken away. Whole countries have been broken up. This kind of shows very much more clearly the breakdown here. And additionally, other countries like Germany will have to pay these huge amounts of money that they were still paying up until about the 2007 or 2008. They were paying this debt from World War I. And the changes also happened in the Ottoman Empire, where it'll be broken up and turned into this mess of territories that are supposed to be independent but are not. They're called mandates by the League of Nations, which is really another way to expand imperialism for Britain and France. Other things that sort of come out at the end of the war are the Armenian genocide in Turkey, which leads to the mass death of Armenians, and something that's sort of reminiscent of eventually the Holocaust. 1.5 million will die between 1915 and 1917, and it's still, though, very hotly contested. So that's the end of World War I. There's one other thing, though, which is the cult of the dead that starts to emerge. This is something that was sort of publicized by George Mossey, but it's interesting about how nationalism and national identity and the idea of the nation and the state start to weed their way into how we celebrate the dead, and it comes about in World War I. Most grave sites before World War I feature information about the person about their family, or about their religion. You can see some, again, symbolism here religious-wise, and then here's like the body of a person who died. It's very much about their life. Same thing here. It's about how long they lived, about when she died, about the beloved and things beautiful. And here we've got some Jewish symbolism, etc. It's very religious and very personal. But after World War I, you'll notice some things, which is these national monuments really idolize national symbols, or like ranks, and they minimize, by putting it farther down, religious symbols and even the person. You notice here, it just talks about how he died as part of the Air Force. It doesn't say anything about his life besides that. Other symbols will develop that are actually literally using militarism, here with the sword, inside of religious symbolism. The biggest example of this is, again, like these unmarked graves that start to show up, where there are these huge sort of markers for these people who have died for the good of the nation. These massive symbols where everyone looks exactly the same, or they're unmarked, are all kind of celebrating not the person so much as the person sacrificed to the country. And this is, again, kind of cult of this glorious dead that you see that starts to emerge after World War I, really celebrating the country as opposed to the person. This is the British grave of the unknown soldier. This is the American one as well. It's all kind of that cult of the dead. What's interesting is that there's some response to this even as the war is going on. This is the French one, which I like, actually. This comes from J.R. Tolkien, who fought in World War I. They had come to the very midst of the dead marshes, some like misty flames flickering slowly above unseen candles of corpses. There are dead things, dead faces in the water, and in a lot of ways, these cemeteries are really similar to his way of looking at the remembrance in his universe of these sort of the dead people, and how they become sort of symbols of the nation more than they are people. You guys looked at other responses to the end of the war with expressionism and how it interprets World War I, but I'm going to mostly go by these because we're going to have a discussion post about this. This all leads into fascism, which has this symbol here, the fasces. And it's important to notice the things on it first. The fasces is a Roman symbol of power and authority that combines multiple wooden rods bundled together with an axe in it. It's this idea of unity provides strength, and that strength provides unity. This double idea of this power symbol. Now, after World War I, Europe is in chaos. There's economic depression due to the mass return of soldiers, debt from the war, shrinking wartime spending, and then, of course, the Great Depression that happens later. And there's a sense in some countries like Germany and Italy that they've been betrayed by the Treaty of Versailles. Germany, we know, because of the loss of territory, the blame, and also the debt they have to pay. Italy was supposed to get more territory, though, and so they feel gypped by France and Britain. Now, it's worth noting that for Italy, there isn't actually a lot of issues, but it's this perception of destruction, this perception of a lack of action that creates the space for radical actors, which is fascists, or fascism, and Benito Mussolini specifically. Now, Benito Mussolini was originally a soldier and a socialist, but after coming home, he felt like the government didn't do enough and was too weak-willed. He thought that democracy, and representative democracy in particular, had weakened men in Italy and the Italian Empire. And that instead, what people needed is a strong state, a strong government headed by a strong man. And that's where we have this idea that is central to fascism, which is that centralized power in one man who can sort of fix all the problems. The National Fascist Party will be founded in Italy by Mussolini in 1921. They will adopt the symbol of the fasces, which is a Roman symbol, so it's that traditional symbol, and again of power and unity, but not just unity, uniformity. Notice how it's all sort of coming together uniformly as Italians. And the idea is to unite Italy through strong government power and symbols. He has a paramilitary group called the Black Shirts, which is just a group of basically out-of-work dudes and soldiers who all carry around guns, and this is totally normal at this time. Here's them marching. Now, in 1922, actually, the black shirts will stage this march on the capital, Rome, and they will try to force the king of Italy to accept Mussolini as prime minister. He will, but Mussolini will call himself Il Duce, the leader. And again, you kind of see that idea of like combining power, that need for a strong state, and this idea that you need a tough man to do things. Here are the ways that fascism really worked and spread throughout Italy. It appealed to young men with these images of violence and power and strength, and encouraged violence. That the issue with democracy is it's slow and it's ineffective and it makes you weak-willed like a wuss. So you need to go out there and punch people, right? Or when there's smart people, you punch them. It also works on doing a lot of marching and censorship, and lots of education to believe in fascism and believe that the state is providing for you even when it isn't. A lot of these things, again, you can see it's all about display of power, display of violence, display of this, without actually changing much of anything. You can see here that nice fascist education. Once again, I can't stress enough how much fascism played on this idea of manhood, that men had been emasculated by democracy, emasculated by women, emasculated by all this stuff, and they needed violence. So a huge part of this is that they suppress women's ability to participate in the economy, or to vote, or to even go out in public, except in the cases mothers, farmers, or as servants, that they are to serve men is the biggest thing that they're trying to do. Now, what's wild about this is how fascists have what Mr. Yedeko would talk about is that they're scared of their shadow, or they have this kind of like inferiority complex with them, which is that they appeal oftentimes to manliness, even in their statuary, like this is a statuary in Germany, but not every aspect. So you'll notice that like, man, that chest is great and manly, but you notice other areas look a little bit less manly. And so oftentimes there's this constant idea of needing to act out masculinity in a hyperactive way as a way to counteract this like underlying kind of homosexuality to it. Other things that they do, again, like I said, they use marching and a lot of this stuff to do law and order aspects. They will arrest dissenters as well. They will organize people into these massive sort of campaigns like the Battle of Wheat or the Battle of Thread or Silk Production. These ideas to fight problems as if it's, again, using this military language of violence. Oftentimes also the party will just employ people in economic jobs to make it look like the economy is growing, even though it's not. Now, what's amazing about this whole thing is that, I'm going to check what the time is right now. Oh, I'm very close. I'm going to pause it here and pick up with the last little bit for round 2.